Sometimes the biggest influences on our lives are the ones we can't even see. I've been wondering, what if the very foundations of our society are built on structures that profoundly shape us, yet remain almost invisible? It makes you wonder what hidden systems are quietly at play in your own understanding of the world, doesn't it? Today, we're pulling back the curtain and embarking on a deep dive into a truly ambitious and thought-provoking book, Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. Wilkerson undertakes nothing less than to reframe how we understand these, well, deeply ingrained societal divisions. It challenges us to look beyond the surface. And look, we believe that some books must be challenged. This critique uses, as appropriate, a step-by-step critical thinking framework that maps claims to evidence. We also apply an intellectual framework based on the works of Mortimer J. Adler, and we use the Golden Rule and the U.S. Preamble to identify ethical asymmetries. We conclude with a logical analysis aiming for a balanced conclusion. And as we navigate this complex landscape, know that you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation, powered by Google's NotebookLM for deeper, more dynamic book critique. Okay, let's really unpack this. Wilkerson's central argument is incredibly bold and honestly a bit jarring for many people to hear. She posits that the United States isn't just grappling with issues of racism, but actually operates under a deep-seated caste system.
And she doesn't shy away from drawing direct structural comparisons to historical caste systems in India and even Nazi Germany.
Right, which is incredibly provocative.
It really is. Her claim is that this framework, this idea of caste, offers a far more robust explanation for systemic racial inequity than just the concept of race alone. What's your initial take on that, this idea of caste in America?
Well, what's truly fascinating here isn't just the claim itself, but, how Wilkerson constructs this argument. It's really a masterful work of narrative nonfiction. She blends rigorous history, insightful sociology, and incredibly personal, often quite poignant reportage.
So it's not just dry analysis.
Not at all. And she doesn't present U.S. history in a vacuum. Instead, she frames it against these stark global contexts in India and Germany. And this isn't just an academic exercise. It's a book that emerged powerfully amidst the 2020 racial reckoning.
Right. Timing was significant. Very significant. It clearly positioned itself within those intense, ongoing national debates about justice, equality, and social reform. Her core idea, and it's a powerful one, is that America's racial divisions aren't simply about individual prejudice or even overt discrimination. They stem from an enduring, often invisible, caste structure.
Like a hidden operating system.
Exactly. Like a hidden operating system that has silently shaped our society for centuries. It's digging deeper than just racism.
Okay, a hidden operating system, that's a brilliant way to put it. It sounds like she's digging deep beneath the surface of what we typically call racism to find something maybe even more fundamental. So to build such an audacious thesis, what are the absolutely core claims Wilkerson makes? What are the bedrock arguments?
She really establishes two major claims that are foundational to her entire thesis. First, she argues quite directly, quite unflinchingly, that America has a caste system, period.
Not like a caste system, but has one.
Yeah, precisely. And to illustrate this, she doesn't just make a blanket statement. She meticulously identifies in details 8 pillars of caste. These aren't abstract concepts. They are concrete societal mechanisms. For example, inherited status.
Meaning where you're born basically dictates your place.
Largely, yes. Your place in society is determined by birth, not necessarily individual merit. Another is strict endogamy.
Which is about marriage, right?
Exactly. Marriage exclusively within a specific group, effectively restricting social mobility and maintaining that hierarchy. And then there are purity pollution taboos.
Tell me more about that one.
These dictate who can interact with whom and in what ways, often with really profound implications for daily life and social acceptance. Who's clean, who's unclean, metaphorically speaking.
So she's not just saying it feels like a caste system. She's actually breaking down the structural components, almost like a blueprint. That's a powerful approach.
It is.
And the second major claim.
Her second major claim builds directly on the first, that this caste system isn't just present, but it fundamentally underpins and, crucially, explains racial injustice in the U.S. She argues that the discrimination we've witnessed throughout U.S. racial history is structurally analogous.
Analogous meaning it functions similarly.
Yeah, functions in a remarkably similar way to the caste logic evident in India.
Yeah.
And the horrifying systematic policies implemented in Nazi Germany.
Wow.
It's a very specific structural comparison she's making, not just a casual analogy. She's showing how the mechanics of oppression mirror each other across these contexts.
That's a lot to take in, especially drawing parallels between such, well, diverse historical and cultural contexts. To back up these profound and, let's be honest, sometimes unsettling claims, what kind of evidence does Wilkerson present? What does she bring to the table?
Her evidence is incredibly multifaceted. It's extensive, and it's where her deep research really shines. She draws powerful historical parallels. For instance, by meticulously demonstrating how Jim Crow laws in the U.S. actually influenced Nazi racial policy in the 1930s.
Wait, truly? That connection, Jim Crow influencing the Nazis, that's stunning and deeply uncomfortable. Can you give a quick example of how that influence played out? I imagine some listeners find that hard to believe.
Absolutely. It's a shock for many. Wilkerson details how Nazi legal scholars, when they were crafting their own anti-Jewish legislation, specifically studied American Jim Crow laws. They looked at things like marriage prohibitions between races, segregation statutes, even citizenship revocation laws in the U.S.
They saw them as models.
Yes, saw them as potential models for how to systematically enshrine racial discrimination into law. It's a chilling historical echo, one that, frankly, few Americans are aware of.
That puts a knot in your stomach. It makes the connection she's drawing feel incredibly visceral, not just academic.
Definitely.
What other kinds of evidence does she use?
Well, beyond these stark historical documentations, she engages in deep analyses of legal and social practices across these different contexts, meticulously comparing how various systems of hierarchy operated day to day. And she doesn't stop at historical archives. She recounts personal experiences, integrates extensive sociological research.
So bringing in the human element.
Exactly, offering a human, lived dimension to her arguments. A particularly memorable example is her recounting of Martin Luther King Jr.'s experience in India.
Oh, I remember reading about that.
Right, where he was surprised and moved to find the Indian Dalit community, the so-called untouchables, identify so strongly with his struggle in America. It's used to illustrate the lived realities of caste, how that feeling of dehumanization resonated profoundly across continents.
Wow.
And importantly, she doesn't rely solely on narrative. The book regularly cites empirical data and secondary sources, corroborating her central arguments with solid academic rigor.
Okay, so here's where it gets truly fascinating for me. Understanding the different layers of information she presents, because it's not all just facts, right?
No, definitely not.
To really appreciate Wilkerson's work, we need to distinguish between what she presents as hard facts, what's her own brilliant interpretation, and maybe the profound wisdom she's trying to impart. How do you see those layers playing out in Caste?
That's a great way to frame it, using that Adlerian lens. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it helps appreciate her methodology. When we talk about opinion, we see it in her claims regarding the psychosocial consequences of caste. For instance, the deep psychological harm it inflicts on both the subjugated and, even in different ways, the dominant caste.
Right, the internal impact.
Exactly. These elements rest partly on Wilkerson's insightful interpretation of complex human experiences and the narrative style she masterfully employs to convey that emotional and mental toll. It's her considered judgment based on extensive observation and synthesis.
So it's her educated perspective on the human impact. Still incredibly valuable, but distinct from, say, a verifiable date or law.
Correct.
What about knowledge, then? What falls squarely into that category?
For knowledge, this refers to the verifiable, factual references in the book. Specific legislation, documented historical events, and those legal similarities she highlights.
Like the Jim Crow and Nazi policy connection we just discussed.
Precisely. Those are well-sourced facts and historical records that stand on their own. They form the backbone of her argument.
And then there's understanding, how does she build that bridge between the facts?
Wilkerson truly excels at creating understanding. She connects these discrete facts across different eras and cultures. She doesn't just list them, she meticulously weaves them together to form a coherent, overarching argument about social hierarchy and collective psychology. You start to see a profound pattern emerging from seemingly disparate pieces of information.
So she reveals how these systems actually operate, connecting the dots for us.
Exactly, allowing you to grasp the larger structure.
And finally, what about wisdom? Where does that come into play in her work? Is she aiming for something beyond just understanding the system?
I think she absolutely is. Ultimately, there's the aspiration to wisdom. Wilkerson aims to prompt a collective moral reflection about America's future. By linking structural oppressions across time and place, she invites us to consider deeper truths about human dignity, justice, and potential pathways forward.
Moving beyond facts and patterns to ethical insight.
Yes, moving us to a broader ethical insight about how we should live and build society.
Okay, so if we consider that drive for moral reflection and the call for deeper ethical insight, let's discuss the ethical dimension of Wilkerson's work more directly, especially regarding fairness. Does her analysis implicitly apply something like the Golden Rule? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Oh, absolutely. I think her analysis implicitly applies the Golden Rule by constantly advocating for reciprocal empathy and dignity across these social divides she outlines. By meticulously mapping out caste hierarchies, she highlights how entrenched privilege and prejudice fundamentally violate that moral reciprocity.
It's showing the failure of that rule in practice.
Precisely. It's a powerful critique because she shows how these systems perpetuate injustice, especially for Black Americans and other marginalized groups. The concept of ethical asymmetry is really key here.
Ethical asymmetry, that's a very precise term. Can you clarify what that means in this context?
Yeah, it's about the double standards, fundamentally. The way systems are designed so that one group benefits from rules or conditions they would never want applied to themselves.
Right.
For example, if you wouldn't want your child to attend a substandard school or be denied a job or face constant indignity simply because of their birth,
And supporting a system that does that to others.
demonstrates this asymmetry.
Yeah.
Wilkerson's work effectively acts as a mirror, showing us how our society often fails this basic moral test,
Yeah.
leading to profound and often invisible suffering.
That's a crucial point. Okay, let's pivot slightly. If we think about the foundational principles of the U.S. Preamble, those lofty ideals like form a more perfect union or establish justice, how do Wilkerson's arguments hold up under that lens? Does she suggest America is living up to them or falling short because of this caste system?
What's truly fascinating here is how her critique directly engages with those very ideals, often highlighting, quite starkly, where the nation falls short. Through the lens of the preamble, Wilkerson's insights become even sharper, almost painfully so. Form a more perfect union, for instance.
Yeah.
She argues that truly confronting caste is absolutely necessary to heal national divisions that have plagued the country since its inception. She's essentially saying we can't achieve true unity until we address these deep structural fissures.
So the union can't actually be perfect or even more perfect until these caste realities are acknowledged and dismantled.
That's the strong implication. And regarding established justice, she meticulously details how rights and opportunities have been systematically distributed along caste lines. This isn't accidental, she argues. It's a structural undermining of justice that has had profound intergenerational consequences, creating a stratified society where access is often predetermined by birth.
Not exactly justice for all.
Far from it, in her view. For domestic tranquility, the book powerfully suggests that unresolved caste tensions are a key explanation for ongoing unrest and violence, indicating that genuine peace and stability are elusive without addressing these deep-seated issues that fester beneath the surface. And when it comes to common offense and welfare, Wilkerson critiques how national policies and resource allocation have often prioritized the dominant caste, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly.
At the expense of others.
At the expense of marginalized communities, yes. This shows how collective well-being suffers dramatically when a society is structured this way, ultimately weakening the entire nation.
And liberty. The final goal mentioned in the preamble.
On liberty, she delivers a stark warning. True freedom and self-determination remain largely inaccessible for those deemed the lowest caste. She calls for transformative change, suggesting that the promise of liberty for all is, in many ways, an illusion until these caste structures are profoundly challenged and dismantled. It's a powerful challenge to America's self-perception.
It's clear this book has a profound impact, really reshaping how one might understand history and society. But look, no work of this scope and ambition is without its nuances and criticisms.
Of course not.
Let's transition to a critical look at the book's arguments, acknowledging both its immense power and maybe some points of contention. What are some of its undeniable strengths?
We can certainly identify significant strengths. Her innovative reframing of American racism through this comparative caste analysis is arguably its greatest contribution. It gives us a new lens, a new language.
A different framework.
Exactly. The book is also widely lauded for its rich historical research, bringing to light many overlooked connections, like the Nazi one we discussed, and for a truly compelling narrative voice that draws you in, making complex ideas accessible. There's an undeniable ethical urgency, too, rooted in lived experience and documentary evidence, which gives her arguments immense weight and moral authority.
You feel the weight of it.
You do. And broadly, her historical documentation and structured argumentation provide substantial warrant for most of her central claims. She doesn't just assert, she builds a case.
She definitely builds a compelling case. But where do the critics push back? What are some of the weaknesses or points of contention that scholars and readers have raised?
Well, despite its strengths, there are indeed areas where critiques emerge. Wilkerson's analogies between U.S. racial hierarchy and the systems in India or Nazi Germany, while provocative and insightful, are sometimes criticized for potential oversimplification.
How so?
Critics might argue she sometimes ignores significant cultural, historical, or even philosophical differences between these systems in making the comparison stick so tightly. Some note possible false equivalencies, arguing that maybe not all forms of discrimination fit neatly into a caste framework, or they point to what they might call slippery slope reasoning.
Meaning stretching the comparison too far, perhaps, flattening important distinctions.
Precisely. That's one line of critique. There's also the point that her sweeping narrative occasionally presents data or interpretations that are still contested within academic circles as if they were settled consensus.
Okay, presenting debated points as fact.
But perhaps presenting her strong interpretation without fully acknowledging the ongoing scholarly debate around certain points,
Yeah.
and perhaps most importantly for some critics,
Yes.
they argue for greater complexity regarding individual agency, the various forms of resistance movements throughout history, and the dynamics of social mobility that have existed, even within oppressive systems.
Suggesting her focus on structure might sometimes overshadow individual or group efforts to navigate or challenge it.
That's the argument, yes, that the picture might be slightly more complex regarding agency and resistance than the primary focus on structure might suggest. And just for a reminder, as we continue our exploration of this important book, you're experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation designed for deeper, more dynamic book critique. For further insights and to inspire reflection and rational thought, check out Mindful Moments on our YouTube channel, where we offer AI book analysis, summaries, critiques, and podcasts.
Good point. So those criticisms highlight the inherent complexity of the topic, even within such a meticulously researched book like this one. It sounds like even with all the insights Wilkerson provides, there are still a lot of layers to peel back.
Right.
What unresolved questions do you think her work leaves us grappling with?
Yeah, it definitely sparks further questions, big ones. First, how can policy and civic education meaningfully dismantle these caste logics themselves, not just address the symptoms of racial inequality?
Getting to the root cause, the underlying mindset.
Exactly. How do you change the operating system, not just the apps? And perhaps even more practically, what concrete, actionable steps translate the book's powerful insights into sustained, real-world change?
Right. In our daily lives, our communities, broader society, how do we move from understanding this framework to actually doing something about it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. That brings us to a crucial point, the so what factor. What's the ultimate wisdom we can glean from Wilkerson's Caste, and what are the long-term implications of her work if we truly take it to heart?
I think the book's vision of long-term consequences, social, economic, even spiritual, is undeniably clear. It advocates that confronting hierarchy, this caste system, is absolutely essential for greater communal flourishing.
It's not just about one group, it's about everyone.
That's the core message. The implication is profound. Ignoring caste doesn't make it disappear. It merely allows it to perpetuate harm across generations, silently shaping lives and limiting potential for everyone, ultimately. Wilkerson encourages an ethic of collective care that genuinely transcends individual advancement. It's a call for societal transformation.
Grounded in what?
Grounded in dignity and justice for all. It's a powerful, urgent call to move beyond just self-interest or group interest, to embrace a broader shared responsibility for the well-being of every single member of society.
And that leads to a truly provocative thought for you, our listener, to take away today. If Wilkerson is right, and these invisible caste dynamics are so deeply woven into the fabric of society, how can you begin to recognize and maybe even challenge those subtle caste dynamics in your own sphere, perhaps in your community, your workplace, or even, maybe most importantly, within your own perceptions and assumptions about others? It's certainly something to ponder long after our conversation ends. Now, just to reiterate, this critique rigorously follows each step of a systematic and precise framework. We've integrated logical, Adlerian, ethical, civic, and even implicitly religious criteria for what we hope is a balanced, rigorous evaluation. Click the link on screen for the in-depth book analysis. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally. See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.